Hail Oxal, my tribe, and welcome to the Modern Barbarian Podcast. Today we're going to discuss a historical character or person that we could all take some life lessons from. This is the story of the Berserker of Stamford Bridge. So I did some research on this person over the last several years. She's been a kind of like a historical folk hero of mine that I really enjoy learning about and reading about. And I think he's a good historical person for my followers to learn about. So, I want to tell you a brief story about him, and then we'll talk about some things that we can learn about him. So, the Berserker at Stamford Bridge refers to the Norse warrior Egil Skallagrimsson, who is said to have killed many men in a berserker rage at the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066. He was a Viking Age war poet, believed to be a sorcerer, a berserker, and a farmer. The Battle of Stamford Bridge took place on September 25th of 1066, near the Battle of Stamford Bridge in East Riding of Yorkshire, England. It was a significant conflict during the Norman conquest of England, which ultimately led to the Norman victory at the Battle of Hastings, which ultimately led to the victory at the Battle of Hastings later that same year. This battle was fought between the army of King Harald Hardrada of Norway and the army of King Harold Godwinson of England, and it was a major engagement in the lead up to the Norman conquest of England. According to Norse sagas, Egil was a fierce warrior and a skilled poet who had a reputation for being uncontrollable in battle. He is said to have entered a berserker rage at Stamford Bridge, killing many men and helping to secure a victory for King Harold. Additionally, while King Harold Hardrada won the battle, he was killed in action and his forces were eventually defeated by King Harold Godwinson at the Battle of Hastings. Harold Hardrada's invasion was supported by Harold's estranged brother Tostig Godwinson, who had been exiled from England. As the English army under King Harold was occupied in the south of England, the Norse army of Harold Hardrada's forces arrived in the north unopposed. They made their way towards York, where they intended to establish a base of power. However, Harold Godwinson quickly gathered a force and marched northward to confront the Norwegians. When the English army arrived at Stamford Bridge, they found the Norse forces divided. Some of the Vikings were on the eastern side of the river Derwent, while the rest, including Harold himself and Tostig, were on the western side. Taking advantage of the split, the English King Harold launched a surprise attack on the Norse troops on the eastern side, defeating and killing them. I know it's a little bit confusing here as we read some of the history because both kings were named Harold. But basically what you've got is the Norwegian Viking army comes down from the north while the English army is in the south expecting another invasion from a different country, from a different way. The Vikings come in basically unopposed up north, and they're marching through, and the English hear about it and head north to confront them. And just happened to get lucky on timing. They were crossing a very small, like one lane, one person at a time type bridge that the Vikings had to cross to go where they were going, and half the army was on one side of the river, half the army was on the other side crossing this bridge at Stamford Bridge, right? And so the English attack the smaller force on the side of the river that they're on while the army is divided and kill most of them. As the battle progressed, a single Norse warrior, identified as Egil Skallagrimsson in the sagas, is said to have fought ferociously in a berserker rage. Egil is described as a formidable warrior who single-handedly held the narrow bridge, preventing the English from crossing. He killed many English soldiers until an English soldier floated under the bridge in a barrel and thrust his spear up through the planks, mortally wounding Egil. The Battle of Stamford Bridge marked a decisive victory for Harold Godwinson, but his triumph was short-lived as he was defeated by William the Conqueror at the Battle of Hastings less than 3 weeks later. So what we've got here, again, armies are divided on each side of the bridge. This army is trying to get back across the bridge to link up with the main army and get away from the English. Once the majority that were going to be able to make it, because they killed most of them, had made it, Eagle Skallagrimsson stands in the middle of this bridge alone. Nobody else around, nobody to support him, one man, and challenges the entire English army to try and cross this bridge. And holds the bridge while the remainder of the army on the other side get back together, get their stuff reorganized, get all their gear and equipment ready, and form a shield wall to be ready for battle. All by himself. Knowing that this would probably cost him his life, knowing that, he was going to his death to save his brothers, he stands alone on the bridge and holds off the entire English army, one man. So, what kind of life leads a person to be able to do that kind of thing? To stand alone to save all of his brothers and sisters and warriors, his tribe, right? What leads him to be able to stand on this bridge and face an entire English army alone to save them? Let's read a little bit about his history. He composed his first poem at 3 years old. At the age of 7, he was cheated in a game with some local boys. Enraged, he went home, procured an axe, and returning to the gaming area, split the skull to the teeth of the boy who had cheated him. Now, this is at 7 years old. Different time, right? They lived in a different time. If you did something like that today, you would be in jail forever. But again, in that time, honor was different, and you could pay a bit of blood money, basically, and that was the punishment for murder. So, if you cheated somebody, you could be killed for it, and it might cost them a little bit of money, but it was perfectly legal once they paid. And you see here, at the age of 7, he took his first life in the name of honor and defending the tribe. After, again, the next thing, completely new story here, but after Berg Onunder refused to allow Eagle to claim his wife Asgerder's share of her father's inheritance, he challenged Onunder to a man-to-man fight on an island. This type of fight was called a Honganga. It's basically a duel to the death by blades. Berg refused the challenge, but was later killed along with his brother Hod by Eagle. Eagle then later killed the last of the brothers, Atli, the Short, by biting through Atli's neck during a Honganga, which was, again, a legal duel that the Vikings used to settle disputes. So, when you look at this, right? He has this wife he loves dearly, and she is slighted by her family as they refuse to allow her to have her share of the inheritance of her family. And it so enrages Eagle that he kills the entire family. That's defending tribal honor. That's what it means to be a barbarian. Again, things have to be a little bit different now due to the different rules and regulations that we live under. We would just wind up in prison forever if we acted exactly as Eagle did. But we can learn from those actions, right? We can learn from what he did. It's okay to defend your honor. It's okay to defend your tribe. There has to be some new boundaries nowadays about how far we can go to defend the tribe, but we can still be as fierce, as tenacious, as ferocious, as ruthless as he was. We just can't take human life, willy-nilly like that. That was a difference of the culture and the time. They were more willing to take human life in the name of honor than is acceptable in today's culture. So, now, we've talked about just a little bit of his history and a little bit of the history of Stamford Bridge, very, very briefly. I want to point out that I'm not a historian, right? This is just me and what I know and my little bit of research. and what I know about this person and have looked up to for quite some time. But just the idea of the Berserker on Stamford Bridge has lasted with us for a very, very long time. And you get the history. Some of the other history to know here is that the Norse were trying a new battle tactic. Right, not everybody was with it, but they had chosen to leave most of their armor behind to travel quick and light, and they were trying to do basically blitzkrieg like the Germans did in World War II, where they were pushing through and only taking major cities to capture an area. Right, they knew that if they took the strongholds of the city, the parts that were used to defend it, and all the cities around it in this area, they could basically claim the area. So they were moving hard and fast through very quickly, and in order to do that, they left a lot of their armor behind and were fighting quick and unarmored in ambush style fights. Right. Now, a few of them still had their armor with them. Eagle was believed to be one who carried some armor, although the Berserkers were well known for being lightly armored to begin with. But they went into battle the way they always did. They didn't change things. They were known to be some of the best warriors in all of Norse culture. Right, so you got this guy, and he sees this massive English army. Boom, they're on this side of the bridge, right? His people are on this side of the bridge with some of them over here trying to get back. And we need somebody to hold this bridge in the middle to defend his tribe from the invaders while they get ready to fight because they're caught off guard. And so he marches out into the center of this bridge, one man alone, and challenges the entire English army. Just think about the courage that would take for a minute to walk out into the center of this bridge alone and challenge the entire English army. Then he stands there and fights, and it's estimated, historians have a hard time with it. There are wildly different numbers depending on the sagas that you read and what historians have found at the site and stuff, but it's estimated to be in the range of 40 men. He stood there and single-handedly slayed 40 Englishmen to hold this bridge as they were trying to get across to get to his tribe to take them over, right, and kill them. 40 men. And it would have been more, and he would have held longer, but the English finally had to come up with some dirty trick to get around them into an angle that he couldn't fight back to kill him, which I get. All's fair in love and war, right? But you just have this insanely courageous man sacrificing his life to save all of those that he loves on his side, right? And that's something I see that I've always said too, is the barbarian fights not because he hates what's in front of him, but because he loves what is behind him, right? We put ourselves at the forefront to defend our tribe. We put ourselves in harm's way and risk our own lives to defend our tribe. At all times, we are willing to do that. And this is a key example of what that looks like. What being the barbarian should aspire to be, right? What we can see is the epitome of courage and bravery and skill and honor and mastery. This man lived by the noble virtues. So, I've got about 8 things I think I wrote down here. Yeah, 7 things, excuse me. 7 lessons that I want us to learn from this brief study of Eagle Skallagrimsson, the Berserker of Stamford Bridge. And there's a great many books out there and a lot of really good stories about this guy. He even has his own saga, Eagle Saga, where you can go learn more about his life in a Norse saga type of way. But for today, let's just talk about a few quick lessons that we could learn from Eagle Skallagrimsson and apply to the life of the modern barbarian. First off, he's a man who loved his tribe. He protected his wife and children, and he put himself in harm's way to make sure they got what was rightfully theirs. Right? So we're talking the smallest version of tribe first, his immediate family and tribe, the ones he lived with and loved. He saw his wife being taken advantage of by her brothers, and that was doing harm to his tribe, the future of his children, his group. by a group that should have been part of the tribe but were betraying the tribe and taking advantage of their family. That hits really close to home. I have a personal experience with family betrayal. Maybe one day we'll talk about what happened there on the podcast, but not today. But just know that I have a very deep personal experience with some family betrayals, and I know what that feels like. And to have to defend yourself and put yourself in harm's way and go through hardship to protect your tribe and your family from the fallout of inter-family betrayal. It's very difficult, right? And we hear about him doing that in the sagas. So it's important enough about his life that was written about that he went to war with an entire group and slayed many men in legal combat to defend the honor of his tribe and to regain what was rightfully his wife's property. Second thing we can learn from Eagle is he clearly practiced all of the barbarian virtues, which again are strength, courage, mastery, honor, and tribalism, right? So obviously he's a berserker warrior for a Norse army, and he stood against 40 men armed only with one battle axe. There's some strength there, both strength of mind, strength of heart, strength of body. He had to be able to fight long enough to take on 40 oncoming opponents. And something to think about too as to how this is possible. You know, it sounds almost too far-fetched to be real. One man versus 40. This sounds like the shit you see in the movies that we all talk about not being real. The reason this worked was the formation of the bridge. The bridge was a long, narrow pathway with kind of guardrails on each side, if you will, built by wood, right? Over flowing water, deep flowing water. So you have a choke point where an army has to come in and basically come at this guy single file. So he gets one-on-one combat, maybe two-on-one combat if they're, reaching over the top with spears or something. But he's primarily fighting one-on-one combat. He's just doing it 40 times in a row without a break, where they're sending 40 fresh warriors up against him before they can get through. Right? So, sorry, had a bug there. But you get 40 fresh warriors coming up down the bridge, and he slays one and chucks them out of the way, basically, or goes over them, and they're coming over their pile of their own slain bodies. There's also some mental game to that, right? You start to see, here's this giant, because they were much larger than the English at the time. The Norse were a larger bloodline, much, bigger, stronger, wider, taller people than the standard English bloodline. So you see this basically giant standing alone, bleeding with a battle axe, screaming at an English army to bring it the fuck on, I don't care. And you're literally walking over the bodies of your fallen comrades to get to them to try to fight. That messes with your mind, right? So they're going in at a disadvantage already against a very strong, very brave, courageous, well-known warrior. That's what makes this possible, is the physical choke point that brings an army down into single file. The mental game that crawling over your own fallen men produces as they come. And then, obviously, his own following of the barbarian virtues. We know he had to be strong. To walk out there like that, think about the courage that took. He knows for a fact, I am going to walk over there to my death. This is the end for me. I will not leave this bridge. But everybody over here that I love will be safer because I will not leave this bridge. That's a huge act of courage. Which, I'm going to steal something from a book that I read that I think you should all read. It's called The Gates of Fire. But it resonated with me. And I think it will resonate with all of you too. So I'm just going to use this one part here because it's very, very fitting for the discussion we're having right now. The Gates of Fire is about the Battle of Thermopylae, or 300, as you guys would know it from the movie. The Spartans fighting the Persians as they came in with their 1,000,000-man army or whatever. And they hold off for days with just 300 men. But there's a conversation in that book that obviously we can't know if this conversation really took place, if it was anything about it. They've found some stuff in the writings that make them think that they thought this, but there's no physical proof. It's just conjecture. But the author says something very, very powerful that we could all learn from. And he says the two of the characters are talking to each other and they're asking each other, what is the opposite of fear? And they say it can't be like fearlessness, right? The opposite of fear is fearlessness, or courage. But they talk about these things and say, no, fearlessness is just an absence of fear. That's not an opposite. And courage is not the opposite of fear. Courage is the ability to continue on even though there is fear. But what is the actual opposite of fear? And they come to the conclusion through discussion as warriors that the opposite of fear is love. And that's because love is what drives them to fight and to put themselves in harm's way and to be able to stand out there and not be afraid to die. The opposite of fear was love, because they fight for what they love, not against what they hate. So it's a very powerful mindset, right? And it will help you not only in your ability to be courageous, but in your ability to do what you need to do to be able to defend your tribe. We get up early and we work hard and work out and we eat correctly and we control what we do and we train our bodies and we train with our weapons and we follow the tribal way and the barbarian virtues and we continue to better ourselves, not because we hate something out there, not because we're preparing for something out there that we hate and need to go away, but because we love what's in here. Because what's inside the tribe is worth defending. It's worth spending the time to be ready for. It's worth doing all of this for them because you love them. The third thing we can learn from Eagle is that following these traits allowed him to live a life of adventure and secure his name throughout the ages. Something we could all aspire to, right? By following the barbarian virtues, we have the opportunity to become immortal. Much like Eagle did. He may not physically be on this earth anymore, but here we sit talking about him and a battle that he participated in 1066. It is now 2023. That is nearly a millennia later. No, it's more than a millennia later. 1066, 2023. Yeah, nearly a millennia later. Right? Nearly 1,000 years this man's name still exists. And will continue to exist because it's in our history that we studied it, right? So he is basically, his name has been immortalized because he was able to live by the barbarian virtues and live a life of adventure and honor that other people want to learn about, read about, and emulate. We can take that to heart and we can learn from that. What can we do to become immortal in that sense? How do we make our names last through the ages? Well, a few things are a little different for us, right? We're not going to kill our first man at the age of 7. We're not going to write epic poetry at the age of 3. We're already adults. We're probably not going to have some great war that's worth actually fighting in. Many of us have been to war already and have fought in war, as we sit here and discuss it, and we were not the famous ones in that war. We tried, not necessarily that we tried for fame. We don't go to war for fame. Again, we go to war for love. But we did our due diligence. We did our duty with honor, but we weren't the ones coming out with the well-known medals or, Medal of Honor heroes and those types, like this gentleman would have been. If this had been an American doing this in modern times, he would have gotten a Medal of Honor posthumously, right? This is that kind of self-sacrifice that gets you that. But that doesn't mean that we can't still live a life that is remembered and immortalized. We start with our local tribe, our immediate tribe, right? When we pass on, will our children and our children's children remember our name? We live on that way. Can we do something for them that gives them stories so we remain in the memory of our family longer than 2 generations? longer than the people we've met that will physically remember us. How do we increase that memory, right? Well, we make sure that we pass down greatness to our children, our children's children, so that they'll want to tell those stories. We build generational wealth for the tribe, right? Doesn't matter who you are, how much money you make, what you do, what you believe. You have the opportunity to build generational wealth for your tribe. You do that by building something that they would want to be a part of. Build your lands. Make it family lands. Give part of it to your children when they come of age and have them live there on the family lands. Show them that this will be theirs when you pass. That I'm doing this for you, to give this to you, to set you up so that we have this place generations down and we can continue to make it better for hundreds and thousands of years. You can start that. Not many of us in America have that homesteaded mentality where we build something and we pass it down generation after generation after generation, and we keep it and we take care of it. It's so easily done now that, and I know I had to do it too, right? Because it wasn't set up for me to be able to do this either, that, we don't have a family home that we all go back to now. We as men are expected to forge out and find our own way instead of staying with the tribe. And we should all want to have our own place. We should all want to have our own sphere of influence, right? But that can be within the tribal lands. That is the old ways, right? The tribe had its territory, and this was the tribe's territory. And each new man built his own lodgings in the tribe's territory. In the Indians, it was a new teepee. With the Vikings, it was longhouses, But each tribe built their own settled home, basically, on the tribal land. And we learned from that in today that we need to own a piece of property big enough that our entire tribe can live on it, right? Whichever of us is listening to this, and if we're in the position to do so, we should be looking towards that. Where do I go? What do I get where I have enough space to freely give to my tribe and my family for them to be here, be close, be on a compound, if you will, even though that term has gotten this negative connotation in modern society where, the crazy people all want to be over there on a compound and be a wacko militia or whatever, right? And that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is tribal lands where your tribe wants to be together. They want to live in close proximity. They want to spend time together and have these community features that they all share, right? So you could build one gym on the tribal land and every member of the gym use it. And if we're all contributing, how much easier that is, right? Or you work together and you put in one, let's say you all want a swimming pool, right? You put one swimming pool in the middle of the tribal land and everybody uses it. It's almost like a commune, man. It sounds kind of like similar to what old school communism was, well before communism became this evil, horrible thing that it is now, because it really is, right? Communism now is nothing like what the original people thought of with communism. It's more like the old school Israeli setup where they built these large family farms and everybody lived together and worked together to survive, right? The old ways. And it's, people will say I'm preaching communism. I'm not. But there's nothing wrong with having community. That's the difference. It's not communism. It's just community. Bring your tribe together. Have a tribe and share like resources so that everybody in the tribe comes up together. That's how we live a life that can secure our name throughout the ages. We start that for our tribes. We give it a name, right? And then somewhere on that land, we have a sacred place where the fallen of our tribe go. And we keep this land forever. This is our place. This is where we live. This is where we die. This is where we remember. And in that way, you can build something that lasts a very long time. The fourth thing that we can learn from Eagle is he learned to abhor those without honor at a very young age. We see this by looking at what he did to the kid who cheated him. He knew that kid wasn't in his tribe, and he treated him as thus. So, he had a disdain for dishonorable people. He also had enough belief in himself and enough self-esteem to know that he could not be cheated that way, and he would defend his honor. Again, I don't know that life for money is always the right answer. There are times that it's worth a human life. I don't know that a little bit of money is one. But it's a really good abject lesson for us to look at as to how far he was willing to go. We can learn from it and say, I don't think I would go that far, but here's how far I would be willing to go if somebody did that to my tribe. Here's what I would do if that were to happen. And it's a way to prepare your brain for these decisions before you're in the moment and have to make a snap decision. You can read stories like this and think to yourself, hey, what would I do in that? If I was in this situation and somebody stole a great amount of money from me and left me and mine in a very bad situation, what would I do? Right? And you make that decision for yourself in advance so that you know how to behave and you can make a calm, rational decision instead of a snap decision in the moment. And you can apply your virtues to the decision. And so you can pre-make all these decisions in your head and be prepared for it. Versus, I believe what Eagle did here was probably a snap decision, right? He went out, he flew off the handle at a very young age, a very young boy, and took his first human life at the age of 7. I'm not saying that we should do that. I'm saying that we can learn from that. We should learn not only from his strengths, but also his mistakes, right? So work on yourself and work on your ability to make those decisions by pre-making them and having that thought out ahead. The fifth thing we can learn from Eagle is he was a skilled warrior, a poet, and devout of faith. This shows that he was a man committed to bettering himself, and those results speak for themselves. What we should see here is him living the barbarian lifestyle and how important that lifestyle is, right? He took care of himself. He was in very good shape, mentally and physically. He was comfortable with himself enough to be able to step out on that bridge and say, I'm willing to die, and know that it's my time and that I've lived a good life and that my name will be remembered throughout the history and that is a worthy death, right? A death with honor. He was also a poet, right? And there are some of his writings still existing to this day. That's one other way that he is remembered. But another important piece of that is, to them, poetry, they were skalds, right? The poetry was how they did what we're doing right now. How they had their time to think and create. We can't be just warriors. The balance of life requires destruction and creation, right? We must be capable of both. We must be capable of destroying and protecting and great violence when it's time to do great violence. But we also must have the capacity for love and creation. So for him, that was poetry. For you, it can be anything that you like, right? I like to work with leather. I like to work on cars. I like, those types of things to create. Obviously, I have the podcast that you guys are listening to or watching right now, right? This is a weekly creation that I do that's important to me. Because at this point, we hardly have any listeners. We're very, very small. We get 10, 12 people across all the platforms that listen to each one of these that I do. I spend hours each week writing these and, hours recording and editing and all that stuff for the 10 or 12 people, because I think those people are important. You listening to this are very important because you believe what I believe. Maybe not every piece of it, but you believe it closely enough that you're sitting here willing to listen to what I have to say every week. And that's important, right? This is an important movement for the people. We need people like us out there in the world making a name for ourselves, building these tribes, building the tribal lands, changing the modern people to look back at the old ways that work. It's only been since the Industrial Revolution, the last 100 years or so, that human beings have lived this way. Since we've broken off on the large extended families and tribes, and we've gone to living in towers in the skies, and look at what it's done to the people, right? We're killing each other in numbers unheard of. We blame inanimate objects for the actions of the people. Most of our food is fucking poison now, right? It's horrible for you. We live in slovenly, horrible ways. We don't take care of ourselves. We're not capable of fighting. And we've let an elite ruling class take over everything and turn us into wage slaves. That has all happened since the Industrial Revolution. Since humans started living in this new way that's so much better, have we lost everything that's so important. Eagle didn't live that way. He lived a better life than we are living right now. Even if it was harder, even if it was a little bit grittier, even if there was more death, they were free. Far more free than we've ever seen. Far more free than we will probably ever be. But it's because they were committed to bettering themselves. They believed in personal responsibility. And the results of that type of lifestyle speaks for itself. Yeah, it was hard. No, they didn't have air conditioning. No, they didn't have video games. Right? But they had something better. They had a tribe. They had people that were always there for them. They could always count on. And they never had somebody stepping on their toes, telling them what to do with their stuff on their land. They were truly free. And that is better than an air conditioner any day of the week. The sixth thing we can learn from Eagle. Eagle was a berserker who are claimed to have been mad with bloodlust during battle. But I think this is something the stories get wrong. Berserkers were actually those who had conquered death already. They knew their time could come at any moment, but believed that living a right life was more important than self-preservation. They loved their tribe and were willing to be in extreme danger, more so than the common man, to protect the ones they loved. This leads to a man that may look to be insane on the battlefield, always running to the sound of combat, but they are still highly skilled and attuned warriors. This is not the same thing as you hear about people talk about seeing red. That is not berserker rage, right? That's just losing your shit. That's just letting go of all thought and flailing around mindlessly and hoping that it works. That would have gotten this man killed in this situation. And instead, he is a renowned warrior, and the berserkers were renowned for being notoriously difficult to defeat. This is the exact opposite of seeing red in a fight. So I bring this up as a point to learn, right, that these berserker warriors, it's a few different beliefs about what they were and how they did. Many believe that there were drugs and ritual involved, some type of psychotropic or, accelerant, kind of like caffeine or PCP, on the extreme end kind of stuff, accelerant that they were drugged up. And that's possible, right? We can't say that they weren't. They had a different level of attunement with nature than we have in our lives now. They may have had something that they knew they could take. And it's also said that it left them drained for many days after a berserker rage, that they went so hard, so long for this, that it also took days to recover from using that skill, which also leads to this belief that they were hungover in some way afterwards from the side effects of the drugs. Which again, I think it's possible. But I think it's more likely that they were doing something more like a bodylifters pre-workout, right? I think what left them drained for days is that they had a mental conquering of death and were willing to fight so hard, so long, and to physically fight until they died of actual exertion, not fighting on the battlefield until somebody killed them. They would not slow down until they killed themselves from exertion, because what they were fighting for was so important, right? I think whatever they did, they were able to tap into the body's adrenaline fight or flight system so hard and were so highly attuned and so unafraid of death that they looked to be insane on the battlefield. They were so ready to fight. They've been known to, they've been, like there's a legend that they would literally chew on their shields in the lines waiting to go, right? Probably a scare tactic. You got somebody over there fucking mean mugging your ass, chewing on a shield, right? Like, that's probably going to get your attention if you're on the other side. I think the Berserkers were incredibly smart warriors. Some of the smartest that this world has ever seen. I do not think they were madman animals. Madman animals don't survive. We've seen that time and time again throughout history. The ones that just lose it and go, flail around mindlessly and have no mind for the fight other than just kill, 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 right? They're the first to go because they don't fight with any kind of intelligence. The Berserkers were known for long-lasting, very difficult to kill, incredible warriors. I think we have a serious misunderstanding of them in history. I think that they loved stuff so much that they went to the battle thinking they were already dead. And because they were already dead, they had no fear. And they had no fear of putting some kind of substance in their body that would make them even more amped up all the time, right? Probably maybe had a similar effect to today's steroids and maybe a little like PCP, right? The pain would be greatly reduced, so they would be able to take damage, cuts, slashes, and hits and feel less of it, which would look like going into an animalistic rage. They'd be a lot less tense and worried about things because they were already in their minds dead when they stepped on the field, right? They had conquered death and had already sacrificed their life to the tribe. So they were at ease. So when you're at ease, and especially if you're amped up on something, you would look just fucking nuts to people in the way you would fight and just go at it and never quit. That's what I think a Berserker was. Again, I'm not a historian. I'm not a paleontologist. I didn't dig up some bones and study them to come up with this. This is just based off my reading and my personal understandings and dealings with combat and fear and how I have to live my life to do the things that I do. I think that this is what they believed. It's what I believe that they believed. And I'll continue to adapt that as I learn more about them. But I do believe that there was more to them than just going mindlessly crazy on the battlefield. And I think that's something we should learn here. This is a good lesson. Any man that could stand in the middle of a bridge and take on 40 oncoming opponents was not just some dude who thought he was a bear and went a bunch and, killed people. There's no way you get through that, and you have the mental intelligence to set that up, to create that scenario, to defend those people that way without being very good in combat and understanding tactics. And the last thing is he knew how to die with honor. He saw that if someone did not stop the English onslaught, that all of his tribe would perish. So he made the tactical decision to pick the best choke point, placed himself between the harm and the tribe. He knew it was his death, but he fought on, and he held the bridge single-handedly until some English coward floated under him in a barrel and stabbed him in the groin. No such thing as a fair fight, so I can't fault him too much for doing it, but it was still a coward's move, even if it was smart. So think about that, right? You're standing on this bridge, and you are balls deep in combat, and you're on your 40th frickin' opponent, and you're just hacking and just laying waste to an army to defend the people you love behind you. And some dude went up the river, floated down it in a fucking barrel, and stabbed you in the nutsack from underneath the bridge. Well, you'll notice nobody knows who's the name of the dude that was in the barrel, right? Why? Because it was a cowardly move. Did it win? Yes. Was it smart? Yes. Do we remember the cowards? No. We remember the man who gave his life on the bridge, who took 40 men down with him because he loved what was behind him, because he cared so much for the tribe that they were more important than his own life. And he stood there and fought to the death against 40 men to give them time to form up and get ready. And because they did, they crushed the English that day. It was a short-lived victory. The Norwegians were eventually defeated, and that was kind of the end of the Viking era. But this was the last true hero of the Viking era. The very last one. The most likely to be a true story that we would know the most about because it's the most recent. And it's also the most epic. One man loved his tribe so much that he took on an entire army single-handedly. So what do we learn from that? Well, this one hits home for what's going on right now, right? You hear them tell us, what are you going to do with your rifle? We have fighter jets. We can bomb you out of existence from the skies. Well, very similar setup. What are you going to do with your axe? You're one man. I have an entire army of heavy cavalry on horseback. What are you going to do? I'm going to stand in the middle of this fucking bridge and tell you none shall pass. That's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to take 40 of you with me. So keep it up. Every one of us is capable of that level of commitment. We are all capable of that level of violence. And that's how we defend a country that we love or a tribe that we love. It's at least how we make sure that they know we are not to be fucking trifled with and they will not take our rights away. Because I can't leave tribal lands to my son if he has no right to land or to defend it. So I will defend those rights to the death. And I'll take anybody with me that wants to go to try and take that from him. You can all make that decision in your mind too. And if there's enough of us that think like that, we are unconquerable. No government can conquer a people that refuse to be led. They refuse to be conquered. They may hold some land for a while, but we will despise them every day that they hold it and resist them every day of our lives until we eventually cast them out. And that's it. That's the last thing, right? We learned how to live with honor from Eagle Skallagrimson. The Berserker on the bridge. It's right here. It's right here, right? It hits close to home. It means something to me that this guy lived that way, right? It means something. It's taken root. This guy has become a folk hero in my tribe. Somebody that I'll always think about when I need to go do something hard. To put myself out there to do the hard thing, to take the big chance, to build the right thing, to go the hard way, to do what needs to be done, to secure the life that my tribe deserves. Somebody to remember, somebody to look up to. All right, let's do our wrap up, right? That's where we're going to stop talking about there. So, if you're watching this on YouTube, please remember to subscribe, hit the little bell. If you're watching or you're listening to this on the podcast side, check out the polls where you get to interact. Drop comments on anything, right? If you guys got any questions, you can comment on the videos. You can comment on the podcast. You can, any way you want to reach out to me. I'd love to answer any questions you have, point you to any resources about this guy that you may want. point out some good books to, learn more about him. We also have our social media. We got Facebook, Reddit, X, Instagram. We've got Tumblr, we've got Patreon, and YouTube or the podcast, right? That's where we're all at. Links will be in the show notes. I've got them all here, but just reading them off real quick. Facebook is the Modern Barbarian Podcast. On Reddit, it's r/Modern Barbarian Pod. On X, it's at mod_barbarian. On Instagram, it's the Modern Barbarian Podcast. On Tumblr, it's the Modern Barbarian Podcast. On Patreon, it's the Modern Barbarian Podcast. And then, obviously, if you're on YouTube or the podcast players, you know those. But it's the Modern Barbarian Podcast on all of those, too. So, go check them out. Use the social media to help find people in your area to build tribes with. If you don't see anybody from your area in it yet, be the first. Help share this out there. Get people in your area looking, and I'll tell them that you're out there, right? Hey, there are people like us. We're not alone. We're not islands. Use this stuff to find each other. We do that, and we help others not be alone by sharing this content, by communicating together on the social media, by commenting on the videos or on the podcast, right? Use the tools that we have at our disposal to build the tribes that we need. And I hope you'll come join our tribe at the Modern Barbarian Podcast. Be a part of what we've got going on, and then go out and be a tribal leader of your own to raise your own tribe.